The Barbie movie is a Greek tragedy where Ken, our tragic hero, his destiny is thwarted by his one fatal flaw, his unrequited love for Barbie and his overall naivete. The movie even shows the greatest flaw of democracy. A secret cabal of elites can use psychological manipulation to sow the seeds of sexual confusion and use warfare as a distraction to seize the levers of power. There is even a scene straight out of Fight Club in this movie, in the Barbie movie. But my favorite scene is when Ken says something along the lines of, "First I thought that the world was run by horses and men, but actually horses are just the extenders of men. Is this not true? Is this not Ken's blood memory boiling up from the depths? Are horses not the extenders of men?" This is the mythos of the Bronze Age when men first domesticated horses. Their speed was 10x, their deadliness in the battlefield was 10x. They could travel 10x further. Their domain, their conquest of land, their presence was 10x. Is this not the extension of man? The world was indeed created by men on horseback, from the chariot lords of India to the cataphractii of the Byzantines to the Polish lancers to the steppe warriors of Genghis Khan to the Roman equites to the Saracens of Salahuddin. The world was indeed shaped by men on horseback. Was not General Washington the finest horseman of his era? Could Alexander have conquered the known world without Bucephalus? I do not know if the directors intended this movie to promote the vision of Bronze Age vitality, but it does just that, and it does it perfectly. And I, a scholar of Kenic philosophy, will be your guide. For those who haven't watched this unintentional masterpiece, I'll give you some context. So we start off our movie in Barbie Land, where the Barbies, the females, own everything. They own all currency, they own all property, they own basically everything. The Kens basically don't even have houses. But the movie is not stupid. The movie doesn't portray this as a feminist utopia. It clearly shows through the use of irony that there's some serious problems here. They show how vacuous the society is. All the Barbies do is party every single night. There is no need for water. There is no need for resources. There is no birth and there is no decay. There is no death and there is nothing to fight for and there's nothing to fight against. Here's a society where nobody's life has any meaning. This is a realm of stagnation, of infinite stasis, a land of never-ending triviality. The movie says every day is the perfect day for Barbie, but a day is only perfect for Ken if Barbie looks at him. And this is how we meet Ken, our protagonist. Ken begins his story arc as a simp. Everything he lives for is Barbie's attention. So the Barbie universe is basically reality and Barbie Land. And whenever something bad happens in reality, that affects Barbie Land. So basically the main Barbie, Margot Robbie, has to go to reality in order to fix whatever is going on there so that she can come back perfect. And on her way, Ken basically hides in her car and tries to stow away with her to reality. That's basically like Act 1 of this play. For Act 2, Barbie and Ken have their first experiences in reality. And this is actually done pretty cleverly. I saw a couple other reviews by the big name right-wingers like freaking Shapiro, and they all start raging at this part of the movie, which doesn't make sense because it's actually intelligently done. Margot Robbie has never had to hit puberty because she just was a woman from day one. She's a doll. But a real woman's life is not like that. There's a genuine period of hardship and misunderstanding and confusion when a woman first hits puberty. She has breasts for the first time. And this is not something we men can kind of trivialize it. We don't even understand the pain/discomfort of it. But the fact of the matter is, when a young woman who's basically a child, she first develops, sexual features, she starts to become attractive to men for the first time. This can be a very difficult and challenging experience for them. And we as men simply have no gauge to understand that by. So it makes perfect sense that Margot Robbie, when she finds her way into reality and when she's looked on as a sexual object by men for the first time, she feels intensely uncomfortable. Of course she does. But that being said, there are some dumb feminist things added on which don't make sense. For example, in broad daylight in the middle of the park, some guy comes and slaps her in the ass. That's not a thing which really happens, let's be real. And if that did happen, other men would beat him up for it. But far more interesting is of course the Ken plotline. So Ken goes on his own way in reality, and we, the audience, are treated to an amazing montage of Ken's introduction to masculinity. He goes around the city and he sees men being masculine, he sees men sparring, fighting, being fit. He sees strong police officers on horseback maintaining law and order. He sees dollar bills with the founding fathers of America stamped on there for eternity. He sees cowboys and horses. He sees golf and cars. He sees trucks and beer and Stallone and all the cool things which make me love being a man. And this montage is actually really, really good. Like, check it out. And the music's also perfect with it. But it does have one serious flaw. You see, Ken hasn't spent much time in reality. He's only spent like half a day, right? So this is the only angle of man that he sees. What he doesn't see, of course, is men dying in needless wars. He doesn't see firemen jumping through fires to save innocent people and dying in the process. He doesn't see oil rig workers. He doesn't see plumbers, electricians, linemen. He doesn't see who cleans the windows on skyscrapers. He doesn't see most of the sacrifices of man. And this naivete will come to bite him later. And the next scene is even better. So Ken goes around in town trying to look for a top job because he saw the montage of masculinity and he thinks that just by being a man he's going to get a top job. He goes and tries to be a doctor. He doesn't have a license. He goes to be a banker. He doesn't have an MBA. He goes to be a lifeguard and he doesn't know how to swim. And men and women turn him down at each of those places. The lesson to be learned here is men don't just get things handed to them on a plate. We don't live in a dominance hierarchy. We live in a competence hierarchy. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. If you can't do the job, then you don't get the job. And of course, there's nothing competent men despise more than an incompetent man. But sadly, Ken doesn't understand this. He doesn't understand that competence is a vital, important part of being a man. And that's what gets him actual respect. You see, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And that is the tragedy of Ken. And now we go on to the Barbie side of the story. So Barbie has to go and find the human who played with her. Basically what happens in the story plot is when a human is sad and playing with a Barbie, that manifests itself in Barbie Land. So she has to find the human and then make her happy in order to fix herself to go back to Barbie Land. So she finds the human. She finds a mother-daughter duo, and the mother is the actual human who controls that Barbie. Or doesn't even control, but the feelings leech onto the Barbie. And then there's the daughter who's just annoying as shit. But the mother's actually pretty decent. But meanwhile, Ken has already gone back to Barbie Land. Think about this. Ken thought that the world was ruled by men in reality, but he still left it to go to Barbie Land to bring his new vision to his comrades, who just before he was competing with. With the Promethean fire he harnessed from reality, he goes to Barbie Land to bring his vision for the future into fruition. This is what is meant by Kenergy. And at this time, the trio of Barbie and the mother and daughter team are coming back to Barbie Land. And now the movie really starts to go. The Barbies realize that the entire Barbie Land has been converted into Kendom. And Kendom is basically the kingdom of the Kens. There's horses, there's big ass trucks, there's attractive women everywhere. Everybody's happy and having a great time. And Ken is explaining the thing which I told you before, he's explaining how horses are men extenders. And is he not correct? From the Knights of the Round Table to the pharaonic chariots of Egypt, men on horseback built this world. And indeed, the whole cowboy aesthetic. Are not cowboys emblematic of the urge of man to expand past his borders into the unknown, to seize unknown riches and bring forth a new future, a new destiny for his people? Are not the cowboys the poster child of Bronze Age vitality? And it's not just men who like horses. Women love horses. Have you ever talked to a woman who's been raised around horses? Girls in general love horses. Why? Because the horse, seen from the perspective of a woman, is a being of skull-crushing power. This is the dream for most women, is to find a man who is immensely powerful and whose power knows no bounds. But to her, he is good, kind, and loyal. That is the imperative for a large fraction of women. No surprise then that all the Barbies of Kendom are actually having a great time. They love the change, as it were. Literally, the President Barbie of Barbie Land says she'd rather be serving beer than being president. It's in the movie. I didn't make it up. But of course, the objection to that would be she's brainwashed. But we'll get to that soon. The psychological operations part of this movie is actually the most interesting. I'll get to it, don't worry. And here we are introduced to Alan. Actually, Alan shows up even earlier, but he's insignificant.
Humans, we're fine.
And Alan.
Come.
You see, Alan is the opposite of Ken. Alan is a weak-jawed, weak-spined, weak-spirited worm of a man who is despised equally by the Kens and Barbies alike. He's ignored by the Barbies as a non-entity, and he's disrespected by the Kens. Alan literally has to massage Ken's feet. And the philosophy behind Alan is interesting too, and we'll get to that as well. When the Barbies reach Barbie's house, they find Ken in there, and Ken has basically conquered that space. He's taken Barbie's house and converted it into his Mojo Dojo Casa house. The mother and daughter team object to this name. They say you can't say Casa and Dojo if you're already saying house. But Ken just dismisses them and says, it sounds good. And he asks them to repeat it. And they do. And here's an interesting scene actually. The mother-daughter team actually fall into the trance. They fall into Ken's command presence. And they start calling it Mojo Dojo Casa house. They're only snapped out of it by Barbie, who wasn't in the trance because she had known Ken before his ascension. And there's some banger lines in this movie. So Barbie finds out what Ken has done and she starts crying and throwing a fit. And she says to Ken, you can't change society in a single day. And to that Ken says, literally and figuratively, watch me. That is a line spoken by a man of action. That is a line spoken by a man of destiny. This is the essence of Kenic energy. He went from a Barbie simp to the lord of his land in a day. He became a Napoleon, a Caesar overnight. If a doll could do it, why not you? And if you feel the Kenergy, let me know in the comments. Type out, I feel the Kenergy. Everybody who does it gets a heart from me. And here's the thing about Kendom. People aren't actually being oppressed in Kendom. There is no threat of physical violence, and there's no sign of psychological manipulation. There's no crime, there's no harassment, there's no catcalling. All the female Barbies are essentially doing whatever it is that they're doing on their own free will. Now you can look at the movie and say this is an undesirable state of events, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is, this is not oppression. This is free will. If you want to say that women can do whatever they want and they choose voluntarily to serve beer and appear attractive, that's on them, that's up to them. And multiple Barbies say that they like this state of affairs more than the previous one. The President Barbie says it, one of the physicist Barbies say it. The general consensus is that Ken made the world better for them. So you see, this is what feminists don't really understand. Men and women actually get along just fine 99% of the time. We like women, women like us. There's a certain kind of dance which goes around between the sexes. You have to show that you have attraction, but you can't do too much of it, otherwise you look too available. But this is a dance which the feminists are not invited to. They don't understand it. They perceive that whenever a woman is dressed attractively, she's doing so because of brainwashing or oppression. This is not true. And they perceive men being loud or brash as a part of the patriarchy or oppression. This is also not true. Women do absolutely go out of their way to appear attractive to men which they are interested in. And men obviously do the same exact thing. This is as nature intended. And this is what the feminists hate. And how do we know that Ken didn't brainwash the Barbies? We actually know. The movie actually tells us. Ken actually says that all he had to do was explain the immaculate logic of patriarchy, his lines, not mine, and society followed his vision. That's not brainwashing. That's called giving a speech to the masses and convincing them of your ideals. Now you can disagree with the ideals, that's fine, but that's not called brainwashing. That's called giving a speech. Later on in the movie, you'll see what real brainwashing looks like. And it's the Barbies who do it. And now on to the interesting part, the secretive cabal. So Barbie, the mother and daughter, and a couple other discontinued Barbies, so the kind of like the rejects of society Barbies, they form this cabal, this secretive organization. And they want Barbie Land to be restored to the old Barbie Land before Kendom. But they don't know how to do it and they're frustrated. What happens at this point is the mother, right? The mother from that mother-daughter duo. She's had enough, she freaks out and gives a monologue, a speech. And the speech honestly wasn't that bad. It was actually pretty decent. And I know this speech did really well in feminist circles, which is fine because it was a genuinely valuable speech. It talks about the pressure put on women, which I agree with. If you think men are under pressure, women are also under pressure. And it's actually worse for them, because at least we kind of know what success looks like for us. But for women, it's a double standard. It's kind of terrible, actually. We judge women using masculine metrics. Society tells a young woman she has to make money, she has to own stocks and bonds and certificates of deposit, and all the things which men used to do. She has to make big decisions, but also she has to be a mother and a caregiver. This is not reasonable. We're asking too much of women in society. We're enforcing two different metrics. On one side, we're giving them the masculine metrics to aspire to, and the other side, the biological imperatives of women still stand. They still want to be mothers, they still want to be caregivers for their children. And every promotion you get, every other hour you spend working is 1 hour less from your child. So women find themselves in a very unfortunate position. They find themselves trapped and exhausted, and they're always tired because we're asking too much of them. This is an absolutely ridiculous state of affairs, and the movie does a good job of pointing it out. But of course, it doesn't put any of the responsibility on the feminist movement. I'm not saying feminism is to blame for all the ills of society. That's unreasonable. But to some extent, they do have to take some of the responsibility. That being said, most of the responsibility is not with the feminists. It's actually with certain decisions made by certain people in certain parts of government, which I won't get into too deeply in this video. Think about who actually won out in the feminist movement. Was it real women? I'm not so sure. A woman now has to do both the job of a mother and also the 9-to-5. The average woman did not really win under feminism. I'm sure their lives improved in some important metrics. I agree with that. But the real winners were the corporations, weren't they? Because now men and women both are competing for the same positions. So the labor market basically doubled overnight. And when you have intense competition for the same exact resources, the price for that resource drops. So corporations can get away with paying low salaries, which is exactly why you need a man and a woman both working in order to support a child. So the real winners of feminism wasn't the females, but the freaking corporations. But of course, this movie was made by a corporation, so I don't expect that to be brought up. Now comes a really interesting part of the movie where they dissect the biggest fragilities of democracy. The first one is the manipulation of mass democracy by a secret cabal. What happens in this part of the movie is basically the cabal of Barbies, the disfigured Barbies, like the mother, the child, and the friggin' main Barbie, Margot Robbie. They go into Barbie Land and they start kidnapping Barbies against their will and indoctrinating them against what they believed in, and they basically force feed them feminism until they become feminists. This is called brainwashing, and this is what the cabal actually does. The cabal basically organizes a well-structured, deliberate plan of psychological operations to use against the Barbies to make them all into feminists. Of course, in real governments, they don't necessarily have to kidnap people and indoctrinate them. There's better, more efficient ways of doing things. But still, the analogy holds well. You know, any democracy needs to be very careful that a cabal of special interest groups doesn't brainwash the population into doing their bidding. And then war. Needless war between brothers. This is also a brilliant part of the movie. So before we get to there, the newly feminist Barbies, each of them seduce one Ken each. So they're all sitting in like a big gaggle, and every single Ken is being manipulated by one Barbie. And they literally say this in the movie. They tell the Barbies to act as though they're interested in their respective Kens, and when the Kens are truly feeling comfortable, they genuinely feel that they're getting the attention of the woman who they love, that's when they go and swap partners to cause the Kens to become jealous of each other, to feed their insecurities in order to seize the levers of power. This literally happens in the movie, and this is portrayed in the movie as good and just. But I see it for exactly what it is, which is deceit and manipulation. So this movie is actually brilliant. It shows young men that even at the peak of their performance, they should always be wary of manipulation, not only by women, but also by anybody in general. So the secret cabal has sown the seeds of sexual dysfunction and sown the seeds of war. And the next day, the Kens go to war. These Kens were just best friends. So because of the psychological manipulations, now they're at war. And the war is to no purpose except that the Kens are distracted. When the Kens are distracted, the Barbies want to go and set up a new constitution. So think about that very carefully. Does this not happen in real life? Are some wars not just distractions and psychological operations? Do governments not cause unnecessary bloodshed and suffering just so that they remain in power for a few more years? Is this not a dire warning to every single democracy that has ever existed since the dawn of Athens to the birth of the United States? That the citizenry must be very careful as to what wars they enter into. And every war spills valuable and valorous blood, while the gremlins and politicians sit back in their ivory palaces and count their dollar bills. And then we have a brilliant scene which is literally copy and paste from Troy, the movie about the Trojan War. And at this point, I think the director knows what she's doing. I think she literally is trying to promote a vision of Bronze Age vitality, because why else will you use literally the Trojan War? And of course, Troy, Ilion, well, however you want to say it. Ilion is a Trojan word for Troy. It's literally called the land of horses. So Ken, he and his navy, they beach on Ken's beach, and the other Kens, the opposite side of Kens, they're holding the beach, and they have this violent battle straight out of the Trojan War. Ken is Achilles, and the other Ken, the Asian Ken, He is Hector, and Hector and Achilles face off in pitched battle in single combat. But unlike in the Trojan War, they realize, thankfully, that the war was set up by the powers that be, and they don't really hate each other. They're just pawns manipulated by the machine. And they come together, they hold hands, and they are brothers. And when all the Kens realize the manipulation which has happened, that the Barbie set them up just as a distraction so that they could change the constitution, they ride against the capital. They go to the Barbies to see what's changed. And here the movie gets even better. So we have all the Kens recently bloodied from this war, ready to fight. They realize that the Barbies have taken their power through the use of manipulation. And at first, when Ken sees this treachery, he's up in arms. He rages at this. He calls out to his brothers, and they link arms in shield wall formation, ready to besiege the capital, ready to take back their power. But now he doesn't know what to do. Can he use the force of violence against females? And you see, the females might have used sexual manipulation and psychological operations against the Kens, but Ken is an honorable man. He cannot use violence against women. And in fact, they show this in the movie. So one of the Kens asks the main Ken, "Who are we attacking, sir?" And Ken doesn't have an answer. And this is where the epic Greek tragedy part of this movie sits in. At this point, Ken capitulates. He breaks down. But anybody who's watching this movie closely understands that he was this close to snapping on the other side. The Kenarchic revolution almost happened. All he had to do was give the command, and the Kens could have taken Kendom and deposed of democracy, and they could have had all the power. The only reason they didn't do this is because they were men of honor, and men of honor do not use physical violence on women. And so the tragedy of Ken unfolds. A man on the path of ascent is brought low by his one fatal flaw, his naivete of human nature and his undying love for his women. Even at this point, Ken could have gathered all the other Kens and then gone to a different place and set up a new Kendom there. He could have even ventured into reality and set up a new Kendom in reality. But sadly, he does not do this. He doesn't have the wisdom. He had the strength. He had the Primarch aura. He had everything he needed to start a new kingdom, but he didn't have the wisdom to know how to do it. That's a beautiful tragedy and a learning lesson for every young man who aspires for the greater things in life. And if you agree with this message, I want to see in the comments, Ken did nothing wrong. You might think that the juicy part of the movie is over, but not so. There's actually more stuff coming up. So what happens now is Barbie goes and visits the beaten and broken Ken and delivers lines straight out of Fight Club. She says something along the lines of, "You are not the clothes you wear. You are not your girlfriend. You are not the job you do." And it is every man's job to find out who he truly is. Tyler Durden in Fight Club says the exact same thing. You are not the job you have. You are not the amount of money you have in your bank. You are not the car you drive, and you are not the contents of your wallet. You are not your fucking khakis. Is the message of this movie much different from that? I'm telling you right now, Barbie movie is the Fight Club of 2023. We are not prone to manipulation, and we understand how these games are played. And at this point, Ken's story arc is essentially complete. He realizes that Barbie doesn't give a single shit about him, and he goes on his own to find his own meaning, which is cool. And then Barbie's story is still unconcluded, and then we have freaking Alan. See, Alan did not participate in the Battle of Ken's Beach. Alan, being the wimp that he was despised by the Kens, and therefore he went on to the Barbies' side. And the Barbies, of course, just ignored him. You see, this is an important message which I have to give to women. And surprisingly, about 10% of the audience is actually female. It's not the Kens of the world that are the actual threat to you. Understand this very carefully. A good-looking man who is already well off, well-adjusted, pre-sociable is not the one who's going to harass you. He might try to flirt with you. You may not like that. And hell, he might even be annoying to you. But he's not going to harass you. He's not going to be a physical threat to you. Allens, on the other hand, are a different problem. You see, Allens won't flirt with you. Allens will not even show you that they're interested. Allens will use psychological tactics. They'll be your friend. But when no one's looking, it's the Allens who actually commit crimes. Be very careful when a man says that he's a feminist. Be very careful and go in the opposite direction. You see, this movie does a very good job of showing male naivete. It shows how men can be very prone to manipulation by women. But of course, the opposite is also true. Men also try to manipulate women. That's also a thing. And it's the Allens which try to manipulate women. And the ending of the movie is actually pretty good. For the first time, I see an ostensibly feminist movie actually promoting motherhood. What happens is, the movie makes it very clear that pursuing motherhood is not a bad thing, which I'm really happy to see that. The movie clearly says, yes, of course, careers are options for women, But at the end of the day, they can choose to be a mother, and that's perfectly fine. I would actually go one step further and say actually motherhood is the most sacred and most honorable duty. And maybe feminists will disagree with me on that, but I don't care what they say really. At the final scene of the movie, Barbie goes to a gynecologist, which implies that perhaps she will eventually, if she wants to, be a mother. It's very nice to see a movie that actually promotes that kind of thing, because most young women think that being a mother is a second-tier activity to actually getting a career. I'm happy to see that young women now see that being a mother could be actually considered the tier 1 activity, and being a career woman is actually beneath that. And for all these reasons, I give this movie 5 Bronze Age chariots out of 5. If you're interested in high-level discussions like these, then you should consider joining my country club, a private society, which I will be launching later this August. Well, I will teach you all I know about esoteric health methods and give you a full classical education, philosophy, history, economics, you name it. These are the things which aren't taught to you even at the university level. These are the things which make you dangerous. Say bye to the camera, B, my B friend right here. Check him out. Let me see if I can bring him to the camera. Come on, there we go. Yeah, take him out. Cute little guy, come on. Yeah, there we go. Can you see him? Look at him.